Hello everyone. Today we're going to be talking about 25 books that I would like to read in the year 2025. Most years I'm able to read a little over 50, somewhere between 50 and 70 books in a year. Hopefully we'll be able to read much more than just these 25, but I'd at least like to say at the beginning of, the beginning of the year coming up, these are 25 books that I've got on my radar that I would like to give a look at in this next year. There's a real mix here in terms of the types of books that I'd like to read. A lot of them are science fiction, fantasy, but we've got some history books in here as well as some crime and some other genres. So this is going to be a longer video anyway, so we'll start off with the first one. Before I begin, though, I will also add I did a video talking about the top 10 series that I'd like to start in 2025. There will be some repeats from that list, but it's not exactly a one-for-one. I just kind of pulled ones that came to mind as I was making this list. Number one is The Darkness That Comes Before by R. Scott Baker. So when we talk about big Goliath fantasy series, you've got The Wheel of Time, you've got Malazan, Book of the Fallen, you've got The Wars of Light and Shadow, but the Prince of Nothing, the Second Apocalypse series by R. Scott Baker is one of the big names out there. I have been on the fence about which of these series should I start first, but Slay, who's famous on a few Discords out there, or at least is well known, really gave quite the compelling pitch for this series. I've heard a number of people who have highly recommended it. Joanna from Joanna Reads, Dr. Philip Chase, Jimmy Nuts, just sung this series praises, and I finally decided I want a piece of the pie. So I'm planning on starting R. Scott Baker, if not even as early as December, certainly in 2025. Book number 2 is going to be Gardens of the Moon by Steven Erikson. So this one's kind of interesting. This was on my top series that I'd like to begin, was Malazan, Book of the Fallen. Gardens of the Moon I've owned for years and have never picked up. I'm nervous to read this. I've read the first 20 pages of Gardens of the Moon just to kind of give it a taste test in the past, and I liked what was happening there. I felt like it was pretty understandable. It wasn't as confusing as I expected it to be, so this one will probably have to wait a little bit while if I'm starting with R. Scott Baker before I get to Erikson, but I don't have a problem with that. The hype for Malazan is not going away, as this is an incredibly beloved series. Number 3 is going to be the book Henry V by the historian Dan Jones. So this is a pretty new release, actually. It just came out a few months ago. Dan Jones is a very interesting historian. I like hearing him talk on different podcasts and interviews that I've heard him in. I haven't read any of his books, though, and Henry V as a historical character is one that's greatly impacted me. The Shakespeare play by the same name about the historical character. I know that Shakespeare embellishes a lot, but that play was very formative on me as a young man, so I'm excited to learn more about some of the history behind Henry V as well, and I've heard that Dan Jones's history books are incredibly readable, so I'd like to get to it. Number 4 is going to be The Dark Tower by Stephen King. So I took about a break between, about a year-long break between reading Wolves of the Kala and The Song of Susanna. And I finally, just this last month, read The Song of Susanna and absolutely loved it. This is one of my favorite Dark Tower books so far. And a part of this is because the world-hopping parts of Drawing of the Three were my favorite parts of the Dark Tower series so far. So Song of Susanna was great. The meta weird elements are like some of my favorite things in the series, and I can't wait to see how Stephen King wraps this up. I know the last book is kind of long. I'm not sure when I'll get to it, but hopefully within the first few months. I mean, I've been reading this series for I think about a year and a half to 2 years now. So I've been reading it for quite a while, and I'm very excited to see in what weird directions it'll go. I like the Dark Tower series, and I enjoy following the characters, but I'm not so invested in the characters that I'm like, oh, I must see a good ending for them. I'm more interested in what are the weird things that Stephen King is going to do with this story. What are some of the literary things that he's going to play with here? How is he going to, break the meta mold that we come to expect with our books? And he already did that a little bit in Song of Susanna, so I can't wait to see that happen even more in the final book of this series. Number 5 is going to also be The Dark Tower by C.S. Lewis. So one of my favorite series of all time is C.S. Lewis's space trilogy, his Ransom trilogy. and there is an incomplete manuscript for a fourth book in the trilogy that he started writing that's called The Dark Tower. I've had a copy of Lewis's incomplete manuscript for years, once again, and have never read it. But I love the trilogy, and since this was something that he started working on and never completed, I'd like to read this as well. My understanding is it's pretty odd, it's kind of out there, but it's always cracked me up that it's got the same name as the Stephen King book, which probably both have a similar inspiration with the Child Roland to the Dark Tower Came, that poem, so it's probably got a similar source there, but I would like to read this book by C.S. Lewis as well in 2025. Next, we're going to have Blackstone Heart by Michael R. Fletcher. So Michael R. Fletcher is famous for his book Beyond Redemption. I also would like to read Beyond Redemption in 2025, but I limited this to one book per author. And Blackstone Heart is the first in his self-published series, his trilogy. This looks really interesting. It's first-person point of view, which has become my new favorite way of telling a lot of these types of stories. I've just really had an affinity for first-person recently. And I've heard it's a very dark trilogy. I've heard that he does a lot of really weird things in it, but I haven't read Michael R. Fletcher. But he seems like an author who really goes for it, who really has some weird and crazy ideas, which I love. I've heard he's kind of a bit gruesome. His books can be dark, so I don't know whether it'll work for me or not. I know it's kind of polarizing, but it's number 6 on the list. Number 7 is going to be The Mechanical by Ian Tregillis. Now, I had only heard of this series because Alan from the Library of Alexandria has been talking about it for years, and he's been planning on reading it for years and is finally doing it in 2025 with a big channel read-along. And he announced several read-alongs, and I decided this was the one that most interested me, so I'm not sure who all is going to be part of those conversations, but I plan on reading along at least and enjoying the conversation as he goes through the trilogy as well. So I bought these books. I don't know much about them other than it's alternate history. I think it's between like Protestants and Catholics in the Middle Ages, and they're using like clockwork technology and maybe robots to fight each other. I'm not sure. Sounds weird, but I like weird stuff, so I'm really excited about this trilogy, and reading The Mechanical by Ian Tregillis is going to obviously be a high priority in January, since that's when the read-along starts. And you can obviously go to Alan's channel to learn more about it. Number 8 is going to be The Sorcerer's House by Gene Wolfe. So, as you know, I'm a big Gene Wolfe fan. I love his stuff. He actually dedicated this novel to Neil Gaiman. I know virtually nothing about this other than it's a Gene Wolfe standalone novel. I've been told that it's one of the better places to start reading Gene Wolfe if you're not going to start with Book of the New Sun. So I don't know what to expect. I know Mark Armini has some resources about this, which I love hearing his thoughts on Gene Wolfe's books. So I look forward to going to that once I've read this book. Right now I'm reading Free Live Free by Wolfe, and once I finish that up, I think I'm going to go into his Soldier of the Mist books. But somewhere in there, we'll get The Sorcerer's House taken care of in 2025. It might not be soon, but we'll get her done. Number 9 is going to be The White Horse King by, I believe it's Benjamin Merkel. Now, this is a biography of King Alfred the Great, and I had this biography given to me a couple years ago. I think my mom gave it to me, actually. And King Alfred the Great seems like a fascinating historical figure, and I want to read a biography about him. So, plain and simple, that's why it's here. Number 10 on the list is going to be The Spear Cuts Through Water by Simon Jimenez. Now, anybody on BookTube who's talking about The Spear Cuts Through Water is talking about this because of Evie from the channel She Was Only Evie. She's been a huge hype man for this book, has sung its praises. Once again, I like weird stuff. I like things that are breaking the boxes, things that are thinking outside the box, things that are kind of shaking up the traditional mold a lot. And The Spear Cuts Through Water seems like it's doing that. I could very well hate this book, but I could also very well love it. Don't know how I'll feel. I know he plays with second person a lot. That's bizarre, but I'm not opposed to it. So I'm nervously excited about reading this one. It's a standalone, and it's got a lot of nested stories, like stories within stories in it. So guess we'll see how it goes, but it's on the list. Number 11 is going to be The Failures by Benjamin Wire. Now, this one came to my attention because Christopher Rocchio blurbed it, and I love Christopher Rocchio's books, and his recommendation sounded interesting. He compared it to Wolf. I've heard other people who disagree with that, but he said he felt like there was a lot of Wolfian things to it. And I know Benjamin Wire was heavily influenced by the Dark Tower series by Stephen King when he wrote this. So I actually started The Failures this last year in 2024. I got about 10% of the way into it, and the Joss Whedon style dialogue for me was really grating when I was reading it, so I actually ended up putting it down, but plan to come back to it. So I think I'm going to read this in 2025, even though I did put it down temporarily. Let's see here. Number 12 is going to be Lord of the World, and this is by, is it Robert Hugh Benson? I don't know, we'll have the picture of it over here, but this is a science fiction novel that was written by a Catholic priest, I think in the 19th century? I'm not totally sure. I think this one deals with the Antichrist in some way, but it's a science fiction novel, maybe an apocalyptic novel. Once again, I heard about this novel also from Christopher Rocchio, saying it was a great older science fiction work that nobody talks about, and I picked it up for cheap on Audible. So, don't know when I'll get to this, but it sounded interesting enough for me to spend a couple bucks on it, and I'd like to read it this next year. Okay, let's see what's next here. Number 13, after Lord of the World, is going to be A Little Hatred by Joe Abercrombie. So I have been going through the First Law standalone books in the latter half of this year. Went through The Heroes and Red Country and enjoyed them both thoroughly. Not as good as the original trilogy, but I still really liked them. Age of Madness is next, after Sharp Ends. So A Little Hatred begins the Age of Madness trilogy. I'm interested to see where this goes. Abercrombie's kind of up and down for me. I find him entertaining, but not always particularly deep. So I'm excited to read the Age of Madness trilogy, beginning with A Little Hatred. Number 14 is going to be Past Master by R.A. Lafferty, I think is his name. This is an odd science fiction novel. I think it's about people who have terraformed other planets trying to build a utopia in outer space. And so they bring back like a, I don't know if it's an AI version or if it's a clone or if they bring him back from the dead, but Sir Thomas More from the reign of King Henry VIII of England. Thomas More, he's the man who the movie A Man for All Seasons is about. So they bring him back somehow to help them create utopia on this other planet. It sounds like a very bizarre, niche concept for a sci-fi novel, but once you start getting past the big sci-fi names out there, R.A. Lafferty comes out a lot as a name that you should pay attention to in more classic sci-fi. So this is his most famous novel from what I can tell. Gene Wolfe was a huge Lafferty fan, so that's the other reason why I'm reading it and starting with Past Master. Number 15 is 11th Cycle by Kian Ardalan. So I meant to read 11th Cycle this last year. You'll notice there's several books that are carried over and just didn't get around to it. This is Berserk-inspired and Dark Souls-inspired fantasy, and I like both of those things quite a bit. And I'm actually glad that I waited on reading this because I reached out to Jake from Nerd Level Rising, and I believe he and I are going to try and have some sort of collaboration. Not collaboration, but like buddy read with this. So I'm excited to read it. I don't know much about this other than that it's a divisive self-published fantasy. I've heard some people praise it, say it's one of the best self-pub fantasy books they've read, and I've heard other people have said it's one of the worst. So I don't know where I'll fall with it. I know it's pretty heavily dark fantasy, but if you're taking Dark Souls and Berserk as your inspiration, like, what do you expect? So I'm excited to read this. So it's on the list here. Number 16 is A Scanner Darkly by Philip K. Dick. And I also recently picked up a copy of Flow My Tears, The Policeman Said. So really, any books by Philip K. Dick. This last year I read Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep for the first time and was blown away. Philip K. Dick is a weird writer, and he's fascinating and really made me think a lot. So I want to read more of him, and I don't know really anything about these two other than the Flow My Tears, The Policeman Said. Apparently, he was doing a lot of drugs when he wrote that book. I mean, big shock for Philip K. Dick. So apparently he was doing a lot of drugs and like wrote in part of the book of Acts into his story, even though he'd never read the book of Acts, which seems like the book of Acts from the Bible, which seems like a bizarre story. So I kind of want to read that one too. So these two Philip K. Dick books are on the list here. I want to read more of him because I was really impressed with Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. Number 17 is going to be Elric of Melniboné by Michael Moorcock. The only person who needed a pen name more than Philip K. Dick is indeed Michael Moorcock. This is sort of the father of like dark fantasy, grimdark in many people's estimation. Michael Moorcock is famous for his, or infamous for his essay Epic Pooh. I think it's a very badly written essay. I think Moorcock makes a lot of his points quite poorly in that essay. But I'm interested to see what his books are about. I know he kind of wrote all over the place, and his books are of varying levels of quality, but Elric is the most famous stuff, and it sounds interesting to me, so it's on the list here. And then next is going to be, number 18 is going to be Genesis by Paul Anderson. So last year I read The High Crusade by Paul Anderson and liked it. Genesis is one of his more obscure books. It's one of the last books that he wrote. I picked this book up solely on the cover. I don't know much about it, other than I know Paul Anderson was a Catholic, and it's a science fiction novel, and with a title like that and a cover like that, I think there's going to be some mix between science and religion in the book. I find that push and pull between science and religion very fascinating, and how that plays out across the genres of science fiction and fantasy. So Genesis, this is not a high priority, but I would like to read it in the next year. Number 19 is going to be Luke Skywalker and the Shadows of Mindor. So last year I started reading Matthew Stover, and I love his writing. I found him to be a fantastic author. Two of his books were amazing, blew me away, Revenge of the Sith and Heroes Die, and a couple of his other books I was a little bit let down by. I didn't think they were awful, but I just didn't love them. So I want to read more of his stuff. I want to read Blade of Tyshal, but I also want to read his other Star Wars novel, besides Traitor from New Jedi Order, and that's this Luke Skywalker novel. So it's on the list here. I don't know much about this, other than a lot of people who criticize The Last Jedi will point to this book and say this is what it should have been. So, hey, that's a good enough pitch for me. Number 20 is going to be The Song of the Siren by Nicholas Kotar. Nicholas Kotar is a self-published, he's an indie author, self-published author, and he's Russian, and this is his fantasy series that is heavily inspired by Russian fairy tales. I've heard Nicholas Kotar talk with Jonathan Pajot and also Christopher Rocchio, and he sounds like a fascinating person, so I'm excited to see what his fantasy series is all about. Number 21 is going to be Corruption by Andrew Klavan. This is a crime novel, I believe. I am a massive, massive fan of the novels by Andrew Klavan. He's easily one of my favorite authors. I've read basically every book that he's written, except for a few. And Corruption is one of the few that I have not read yet. So my wife got this for me for my birthday last year, and so it is something that I plan on reading. Although I kind of got to budget my Andrew Klavan reads because he's not going to be writing forever. So I got to space these out. Otherwise, I'm not going to have new books from him to read for much longer. Number 22 is going to be Lord of Light by Roger Zelazny. And really, you can just put Roger Zelazny as an author on here. I've never read him before. I've heard that this is his magnum opus. I don't know much about it, other than it's got a lot of Buddhism in it. But I want to read Zelazny. I've heard great things about him. But it's on the list here, and I hope to read Lord of Light soon. 23 is going to be Ordinary Grace by William Kent Kruger. And just to be perfectly honest, I saw that Mike from Mike's Book Reviews, John from Talking Story, Brian Bell from BellTube, and Philip Chase talked about this on their book club, and it was them talking about it that sold it for me. The book is set in Minnesota. I'm from Minnesota, so, hey, who doesn't want to read about that? And it's apparently a great coming-of-age tale. Number 24 is The Sunset Limited by Cormac McCarthy. I have read a good handful of Cormac McCarthy's books. This is a play that he wrote, or a novel in play format. It's very, very short. It's very readable. And so I've heard that this one gets really deep into Cormac McCarthy's more existentialist ideas and some of his, maybe you could call it nihilism even. So I know it's just like one long conversation between two characters, but I want to read The Sunset Limited next year. And number 25 is going to be The Prophet of Edan by Philip Chase. And the reason why this is on the list too is I'm waiting for the audiobook. So once Prophet of Edan gets an audiobook, I will be reading it. Anyway, guys, that's pretty rapid fire here, but these are 25 books that I would like to read in 2025. Give me the pitch for which ones I should prioritize. I think The Darkness That Comes Before is going to be really high on the list. The Dark Tower by Stephen King. I think I'm going to try and get that finished up within the first few months. Michael R. Fletcher, I will probably be starting either in January or February reading one of his books. And then, man, I feel like The Spear Cuts Through Water. I don't want to put that one off too far. Otherwise, I'm never going to start it because I'm just going to be intimidated by it. And then let's see here also, Passmaster by Lafferty. I think that one I'll be able to get to pretty soon. So those are some of the priorities. Let me know if anyone else of these I should be bumping up higher. And what are you going to be prioritizing as your reads in 2025? Books, individual books or series, let me know. As always, guys, thanks for watching. See you in the next one.